While I was planning our anniversary, my wife revealed she was leaving me for someone else. But then, I was in the middle of planning the perfect anniversary surprise, the kind of thoughtful gesture that showed how much I loved my wife. But just as I was finalizing the details, she dropped a bombshell that completely destroyed everything I'd worked for. She told me she was leaving me for someone else. In that moment, my world collapsed. I thought I had everything figured out, but I couldn't have been more wrong. What happened next completely turned the tables, and it's something I never saw coming. Stick around, because this is a story you won't want to miss. My name's Mark, and for the past 5 years I've been married to Sophie, the woman I thought I would spend the rest of my life with. We met in college, and everything about our relationship felt like it was meant to be. We built a life together, made plans for the future, and celebrated every anniversary as a milestone. But this year, something was different. As I prepared a special anniversary dinner for her, I noticed a change in Sophie, a distance, a hesitation in her eyes that I couldn't quite place. I didn't know it yet, but everything was about to unravel. The night started like any other. Sophie and I had been together for 5 years, and we'd always made a big deal about our anniversary. It was the one day of the year where we'd put everything else aside, work, stress, daily life, and just focus on each other. I'd been planning it for weeks. From the dinner reservations to the surprise gift I knew she'd love. I even arranged for a quiet, intimate setting at a small local restaurant where we had our first date. Everything was set, and I felt this surge of excitement as I got ready. I wanted this anniversary to be perfect. Sophie and I had a good marriage, or so I thought. We'd had our ups and downs like any couple, but we always worked through them. She was my rock, my support system. She had this warmth about her that drew people in, and her smile, that smile, could light up any room. For years, I'd seen her as my equal, my best friend, the person I wanted to grow old with. We'd been through so much together, graduating college, starting our careers, buying our first house. There were dreams we hadn't even begun to chase, and I always thought that we'd have time for all of them. But that night, something was different. Sophie wasn't herself. When she walked into the kitchen, I immediately noticed it. Her posture was off. Her smile wasn't the same. Her eyes were tired, almost distant, like she was somewhere else. I chalked it up to a busy week at work, but as the evening went on, I couldn't shake the feeling that there was something more going on. There was a tension in the air, a heaviness that I hadn't felt before. We sat down to eat, and at first it felt like old times. We laughed over shared memories, reminisced about funny things that had happened over the years, and talked about the future. But beneath all that, I could sense the unease between us. I kept glancing at Sophie, trying to gauge what she was thinking, but she seemed so far away. Her mind was somewhere else, and it wasn't on me. The turning point came during dessert. I remember asking her, "Sophie, is everything okay? You seem off tonight." It was the first time I said something out loud, but I had been feeling it all evening. Sophie hesitated. She looked down at her dessert, then back at me, her face unreadable. I thought maybe she was tired, stressed about work, something simple like that. But when she spoke, the words hit me like a freight train. "Mark, I've been thinking a lot lately," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "And I think it's time we talk about something important." I felt my heart skip a beat. What was this about? Was it something about our future? Maybe she was just overwhelmed, needed a break. But I had no idea what was coming. Sophie took a deep breath, and then, with a sad look in her eyes, said the last thing I expected to hear. "I think I'm leaving you, Mark. There's someone else." But her gaze kept drifting, and the words that came out of her mouth didn't sound like the Sophie I knew. "Mark, there's something I need to tell you," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Her eyes didn't meet mine, and that's when I started to panic. I could feel the weight of her words before she even spoke them. "What's going on?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "Are you okay?" "I've been thinking a lot lately. About us," she continued, her fingers fidgeting with the napkin in front of her. "And I've come to a decision. I don't think this is working anymore." I froze. The room, the dinner, the entire world seemed to stop. I couldn't process what I was hearing. Was she really saying this? Was she really telling me that after everything we had been through, all the memories we'd shared, she no longer wanted to be with me? "Sophie," I said, my voice cracking as I reached across the table to hold her hand. "What are you talking about? You can't be serious." But her eyes, those familiar eyes I had spent years loving, looked so distant, like she was already somewhere else, somewhere that didn't include me. "I'm sorry, Mark. I never meant for it to get this far," she whispered, tears welling up in her eyes. "I couldn't catch up, but there's someone else. Someone I've been seeing for a while now. I think it's time for me to move on." The world felt like it was collapsing around me. Sophie had always been the most honest person I knew, and yet here she was, confessing to something so devastating. My heart was pounding in my chest, my breath shallow, and my hands felt cold as I pulled away from her. I didn't know what to say. How could I even begin to process this? You're leaving me? For someone else? The words came out like a punch to my gut. Who? How long has this been going on? She hesitated for a moment, then softly replied, His name is Eric. I never meant for this to happen, but I've fallen in love with him. Huh? I could feel the air leave my lungs. Eric. A name I had never heard before. A person who had quietly slipped into my wife's life without me noticing. My mind raced as the realization hit me. There had been signs, hadn't there? The late nights at work, the distant conversations, the sudden disconnection between us. I had been so wrapped up in my own world, so focused on making things perfect for her, that I had missed it all. Sophie, please don't do this, I said, my voice trembling now. We can work through whatever's going on. We always have. We've been through so much together. You can't just throw it all away for him. I never wanted to hurt you, Mark, she said softly, her tears now falling freely. But I can't keep pretending everything is okay. It's not fair to either of us. I've been unhappy for a long time, and I've tried to fix it. But I just can't anymore. I looked at her, my heart shattering with every word she spoke. This wasn't the woman I married. The woman I married would never just give up like this. She would have fought for us, for our future. And yet here she was, telling me she had already given up. That someone else had filled the void I didn't even realize was growing between us. Hold on tight, nakedness weren't on the way, and some had to come quicker. Is there any chance we can make this work? I asked, desperate now. Please, Sophie, I love you. I want to fight for us. But her answer was already written in her eyes, a finality I couldn't ignore. She had made her decision, and no matter how hard I fought, no matter how many times I told her, I still loved her. It wasn't going to change anything. I'm sorry, Mark. I really am. But this is over, she whispered, her voice barely audible. I need to move on. The words hung in the air like a dark cloud. And just like that, the woman I had spent the last 5 years of my life with was slipping away, piece by piece. The anniversary dinner I had so carefully planned lay in front of me, untouched, as the woman I loved walked out the door, leaving me with nothing but the hollow echo of her goodbye. I couldn't breathe. The air in the room felt thick, suffocating, and every second stretched out longer than it should have. I stared at Sophie, my mind struggling to process the words she had just dropped on me. Someone else. My hands went cold, my heart pounding in my chest like a drum, and I couldn't speak for what felt like an eternity. I had just spent weeks planning this anniversary, believing we were in a good place, celebrating the life we had built. And now she was telling me she was leaving? I tried to steady myself, but nothing made sense. I looked at her, my best friend, my wife, and I saw a woman who seemed so far away from the person I thought I knew. This wasn't the Sophie I had shared my dreams with. This wasn't the woman who had stood by my side during some of the hardest moments of our lives. Who is he? I asked, my voice shaky, trying to control the anger, the disbelief that was threatening to spill out. I couldn't stop the words from escaping, even though I knew I shouldn't ask. But I needed to know. I needed to understand how this had happened. Sophie wiped away a tear and looked at me. The pain in her eyes mirrored my own. It doesn't matter. What matters is that I realized I'm not happy anymore. I haven't been for a while. I stood up from the table, my chair scraping loudly against the floor. My heart ached, not just from the pain of losing her, but from the shock of how easily she was walking away. Was this really happening? Not happy, I repeated, my voice rising with frustration. You've been unhappy for how long, Sophie, and you couldn't say anything? You couldn't talk to me about this? How long has this been going on? Oh, her silence answered for her. And the more I thought about it, the angrier I got. So, you've been seeing someone behind my back, while I've been planning this whole night for us? I motioned to the untouched dinner, the flowers, the wine, the things I'd poured my heart into, and it felt like a cruel joke. A lie I had been living. Sophie's face flushed with guilt, but she didn't back down. I never meant for it to happen like this, Mark. But I couldn't keep lying to you. I couldn't keep pretending everything was fine when it wasn't. I owe it to myself, to both of us, to be honest. The room felt like it was closing in on me. I wanted to scream, to shout, to demand answers, but all I could do was stand there, numb. The realization hit me like a punch in the gut. This was really happening. Sophie was leaving me, and I wasn't sure how I was supposed to keep going from here. For a moment, there was nothing but silence. Just the sound of our breathing, heavy and uneven, filling the space between us. I wanted to ask her 1,000 questions, to beg her to stay, to figure out what had gone wrong. But I couldn't find the words. Nothing felt right anymore. Finally I spoke, my voice barely above a whisper. So, What now? What do we do now? Sophie looked down, her voice breaking. I don't know, Mark, but I think it's time for both of us to move on. The silence between us grew heavier with each passing second. Sophie's eyes were fixed on the table, avoiding mine, as if the weight of her own confession was too much for her to bear. I felt like I was watching her fade away, slipping through my fingers like sand. The anger, the betrayal, all of it felt like a storm inside of me. I had so many questions, but nothing I said could bring her back to the person I thought she was. Just, mind you, I didn't want to hurt you, Sophie said softly, almost apologetically, her voice barely audible above the deafening silence. I don't know how to explain it. I thought you would understand, that you would be okay with it. But I can see now that I've messed up everything. The truth hit me like a cold wave, washing over me in waves of confusion. Understand? I couldn't even comprehend how she could just walk away from everything we had. Sophie nodded. I guess. From everything we built. It was as if I had been living in some twisted version of reality, and now I was being pulled back into the harsh, painful truth. Everything we've been through. It didn't mean anything. I choked out, trying to keep my emotions in check. But the words didn't come out right. I wasn't just hurt. I was shattered. My marriage, my life as I knew it, was crumbling before my eyes, and all she could do was offer an apology that felt hollow, empty. I'm sorry, Mark, she whispered again, her voice trembling. But I need to be true to myself. I need to move on. I couldn't even look at her anymore. The woman who had once been my partner, my best friend, had become someone I didn't recognize. I turned away from the table, walking to the window and staring out into the night. The city lights twinkled below, but everything felt distant, like I was looking at it through a fogged-up window. The pain of it all started to set in. What happens now? Where did we go from here? I couldn't tell if the pain was the light again, but it wasn't coming from this. Where did we go from here? It was like my whole world had shifted on its axis, and I was struggling to regain my footing. But before I could speak again, I heard a sound from behind me. Mark? Sophie's voice broke through the silence, trembling. There's something else, something I never told you, and I think you need to know. I turned to face her, my heart racing. What else? What more could there possibly be, and why did it feel like I was standing on the edge of something even bigger than the devastation I was already facing? The room felt cold, and I braced myself for whatever was coming next. Would I regret asking her to explain, or would this revelation be the key to understanding everything that had gone wrong? That moment, when everything fell apart, felt like a lifetime ago. I never imagined we'd end up here, and honestly, I'm still trying to make sense of it all. Sometimes, the people we love the most end up hurting us in ways we never saw coming, but here I am, still standing, even though I'm completely shattered. I guess that's life, right? You don't always get the answers you want. Sometimes, you just have to keep moving forward. But what do you think? Was I wrong to expect more from Sophie? Could I have done something differently? I'd love to hear your thoughts. Have you ever been in a situation where you were blindsided by someone you loved? Head over to iTunes, leave a comment with a question you have about loneliness. Then drop us a line and tell us about it. Comment below and share your story. Let's talk about it. And if you've enjoyed this video, please hit the like button and don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more stories like this. I've got something new coming up next week that you won't want to miss. Trust me. Writing never fails to draw out truths and many treacheries that you never knew. It's going to be a wild one. Thanks for sticking with me through this. And remember, even in the hardest moments, there's always something to learn. Take care of yourselves, and I'll see you in the next one.